Oh, you want to hear about the Vrethkai? Sure. Pull up a seat, get comfortable. Maybe pour yourself something strong, because this story, this particular, spectacular, catastrophic series of decisions made by a species that had been in space for exactly 11 years, is the kind of story that gets told at diplomatic summits as a cautionary tale, and then, quietly, in the back rooms, gets retold as the funniest thing anyone has ever witnessed. Let me set the scene. The Vrethkai were the undisputed apex predators of the Kolveth expanse. 6 limbs, exoskeletal armor that laughed at plasma rounds, neural clusters so fast they could track 12 targets simultaneously while composing poetry. I am not exaggerating the poetry part. They had an entire warrior caste devoted to composing death hymns mid-battle, artistically terrifying. The galaxy had spent roughly 4,000 years learning one very simple lesson about the Vrethkai. Do not look at them wrong. Do not breathe near their territory. Do not, under any circumstances, make them feel disrespected. The Galactic Conclave had 47 pages of protocols specifically about how to interact with Vrethkai delegations. Page 1 simply read, "Apologize first, ask questions later." So naturally, a human cargo hauler named Petrov Ogande, flying a rust bucket freighter called the Meridian Clause, which had a cracked coolant manifold and a co-pilot who was technically on probation, flew directly into Vrethkai sovereign space, completely by accident, and then made everything significantly worse by opening a communication channel and saying, and I need you to understand these were his exact words, "Hey, sorry, we got a little lost. You guys got any food? We're basically running on fumes over here." You guys, he called the Vrethkai, the species that had exterminated 3 civilizations for making insufficient eye contact. You guys, the Vrethkai commander on the other end of that transmission, a 7-foot armored nightmare named Vrek Sohal of the 8th Fang, stared at that message for what ship logs later recorded as 14 full seconds. 14 seconds of complete silence from a species known for responding to provocations in approximately 0.3 seconds. The crew of that Vrethkai warship later described their commander's expression as something between fury and profound, existential confusion. Now, Vrek Sohal had 2 options. Option 1, vaporize the Meridian Clause, collect the debris as a trophy, compose a death hymn about the stupidity of the encounter, and go home for dinner. Option 2, and this is where things get interesting, dispatch a boarding team because Vrethkai law actually required them to formally assess whether an intruder was a legitimate threat before execution. It was a technicality, a formality. Nobody had ever invoked it because nobody had ever been quite this casually suicidal before. So the boarding team went over. They sent 8 warriors. 8 of the 8th Fang's finest, bristling with weaponry, exoskeletal armor gleaming, death hymns already half composed in their neural clusters. They breached the Meridian Clause's airlock, expecting, at most, mild resistance from terrified alien crew before the inevitable and professionally executed conclusion. What they found instead was Petrov Ogande eating a cold protein bar, his feet up on the navigation console, with absolutely zero situational awareness about how much danger he was currently in. Beside him, his co-pilot, one Dara Mensah, 26 years old, 6 months out of the Earth Freight Academy, technically on probation for repeated violations of standard docking protocol, was asleep in her chair, actually asleep. The boarding alarm had not woken her up. Nothing about this encounter was going according to any known script. The lead Vrethkai warrior, a scarred veteran named Thurak Vel who had boarded 47 ships in his career, stopped in the doorway of the cockpit and stared at these 2 humans and felt something he had never felt before in 40 years of military service. He felt confused. "You," Thurak Vel said, in translated galactic standard, because even terrifying apex predators used translation protocols, "are in violation of sovereign Vrethkai space. This is cause for immediate termination." Petrov Ogande looked up from his protein bar, looked at 8 armored 6-limbed warriors filling his cockpit doorway, looked back at his protein bar. Then he said, with the calm of a man who had already accepted that today was going to be a weird day. Yeah, we figured. Navigation array went sideways about 6 hours back. Look, we're not looking for trouble. We've got a cargo of agricultural equipment for the Tasani colony, and a cracked coolant manifold. Can we just talk this out? Thurak Vel had never been asked to talk something out in 40 years. He had never once been asked to talk it out. He sent a message back to Vrek Sohal. The message contained only 4 words. Commander, something is wrong. Back on the warship, Vrek Sohal decided to come over personally, because apparently this situation required direct observation. He brought 2 of his senior officers, Krath Mal, his tactical chief, and an intelligence officer named Sarav On, who specialized in first contact anomaly assessment. Sarav On had spent 30 years studying alien psychology and had written extensively on threat evaluation. He took one look at Petrov Ogande, still eating his protein bar, and Dara Mensah, now awake and offering the Vrethkai boarding team a packet of instant coffee with the cheerful cluelessness of someone who had not fully processed that she was currently surrounded by the galaxy's most lethal hunters. And Sarav On quietly updated his psychological models in real time. Are they? Krathmal said slowly to Sarav On. Genuinely unafraid? Or is this a deception tactic? I have been studying sapient species for 30 years, Sarav On replied, equally slowly. I genuinely cannot tell. The thing about humans, and I want to be very clear that the rest of the galaxy did not understand this yet, because humanity had been in space for 11 years and had spent most of that time arguing about mining rights and eating unfamiliar alien cuisine with varying degrees of enthusiasm. The thing about humans is that they have a particular neurological quirk that does not exist anywhere else in known space. When humans encounter a situation that is too dangerous for their threat assessment system to properly process, a significant percentage of them simply stop being scared. Not because they're brave exactly, because their brains essentially shrug, decide that fear is no longer a useful operating mode, and switch over to something that functions a lot like casual problem solving. Petrov Ogande was not a hero. He was not specially trained. He had grown up in Lagos, studied freight navigation at a middling academy in Nairobi, and had once, memorably, talked his way out of a docking fine on Tasani Station by explaining his situation so earnestly and so at length that the docking official had simply given up. This was his primary skill. Earnest, relentless, completely unself-conscious communication. He was now deploying it on the galaxy's most lethal hunters. So here's the thing, Petrov said, because Vrek Sohal had arrived, and Petrov had apparently decided that the commander deserved a full briefing. We've got about 4 hours of coolant left before the engine core starts running hot. After that, we're looking at a pretty significant explosion, which is bad for us, obviously, but also bad for your ship since we're currently inside your boarding range. So it seems like we've got a mutual interest in figuring out a solution here. Vrek Sohal looked at this human. This small, soft, unarmored, utterly unimpressive biological creature with a cracked coolant manifold and the audacity to open a negotiation by identifying shared interests. Vrek Sohal had not negotiated anything in 30 years of military command. The Vrethkai did not negotiate. They dominated, they eliminated, they moved on. You are proposing, Vrek Sohal said, very carefully, that we help you repair your ship. I'm proposing, Petrov said, that we help each other not get blown up. The repair part is kind of secondary, although also important. Krathmal leaned toward Sarav On and said, very quietly, Is he negotiating with us? Yes, Sarav On said. Has anyone ever negotiated with us? Not since the Pelveri Accord. And that ended with the Pelveri being removed from the treaty. Removed from the treaty and existence. Ah, Dara Mensah, who had finished her coffee, and was now watching this exchange with the alert interest of someone attending a particularly fascinating lecture, raised her hand. Actually raised her hand like she was in a classroom, waiting to be called on by a professor, rather than standing in a room full of armored killers. Can I ask something? Nobody told her no. Partially because Vrethkai protocol did not cover this scenario. Partially because everyone in the room, including 8 veteran warriors, was operating somewhere between stunned and genuinely curious. "Your armor," Dara said, looking at Thurak Vel. "That's a reactive lattice structure, right? Like it shifts density based on incoming force vectors. We studied similar principles in materials science. How does it handle thermal variance? Because I'm asking because if your crew is going to be helping with our coolant manifold, the temperature fluctuations near the engine core might be relevant to whether your armor locks up." Thurak Vel stared at her. Then he said, in a voice that contained about 40 years of military career and absolutely no framework for this moment, "It handles thermal variance adequately." "Great," Dara said. "Just checking. Safety first." Serev On wrote 6 words in his intelligence report that afternoon. He wrote them and then stared at them for a long time, and then decided they were accurate. The 6 words were, "Humans do not process threat normally." Outside, in the cold dark of the Kalveth expanse, the Meridian Clause drifted in Vrethkai sovereign space, trailing coolant vapor, surrounded by one of the most feared warships in the galaxy, while inside its battered hull, a cargo hauler from Legos and a co-pilot on probation were apparently making friends, or something like it. Nobody had a word for what this was. Vrek Sohal made a decision that he would later describe in his official military log as tactically ambiguous. He ordered his engineering team to assist with the coolant manifold repair. He framed it, internally, as gathering intelligence on human vessel architecture. He framed it to his crew as a temporary strategic assessment. He did not frame it to himself at all, because some decisions are easier to make when you don't examine them too closely. 3 Vrethkai engineers crossed over to the Meridian Clause with toolkits that cost more than the entire freighter was worth, and spent the next 2 hours working alongside Petrov Ogande, who had a mechanical aptitude that surprised everyone, including himself, and a running commentary that surprised everyone, including the universe. "See, the problem is the secondary coupling here," Petrov said, crouched next to a Vrethkai engineer named Hevrak Sun, who had never in his professional career worked alongside a species he could crush with one limb. Previous owner patched it with something that wasn't rated for this temperature range. Classic mistake. You ever deal with shoddy patch jobs? Actually, you probably don't. Your ships look extremely well maintained, very impressive. No offense to our ship. I love our ship. Hevrak Sun, who had composed 3 death hymns in his lifetime, and had a kill count that would have made most species weep, said, "Your vessel is structurally creative." Petrov pointed at him. "I'm using that. Structurally creative. Dara, write that down." Dara, passing a calibration tool to a second Vrethkai engineer without any apparent concern about the 6 limbs involved in accepting it, said, "Already on it." Serefon stood in the corridor outside the engine room and took notes with the focused intensity of a scientist witnessing something that rewrote fundamental assumptions. He had spent 30 years studying threat response, dominance behavior, territorial signaling, and species interaction. He had never once written the words he was writing now, which were, "The humans appear to be adopting us." He underlined it. Then he underlined it again. In the engine room, Hevrak Sun had begun, almost involuntarily, answering Petrov's questions, not because he was ordered to, not because protocol required it, but because Petrov asked things with such genuine interest, such complete absence of agenda, that the answers came out before Hevrak Sun's warrior training could intercept them. He had explained the basic principles of Vrethkai engine lattice design. He had described, briefly, and then at increasing length because Petrov kept asking follow-up questions, the difference between a Fang-class warship's propulsion system and the older Claw-class models. He had, at some point that he could not precisely identify, started enjoying the conversation. This was alarming. Hevrak Sun filed a personal note to himself. Discuss with Chaplain. Meanwhile, on the warship, Vrek Sohal was receiving a communication from the Vrethkai High Command because the Meridian Clause's entry into sovereign space had triggered automated alerts, and High Command wanted to know why there was a human freighter sitting next to one of their warships instead of a debris field. Vrexohal's answer was going to require careful phrasing. He went with, intelligence gathering opportunity, ongoing assessment, no action required at this time. High Command's response was 4 seconds of silence followed by, Vrexohal, is the human vessel still intact? Technically. Another silence. Longer. Why? The situation, Vrexohal said, with the dignity of a commander who had absolutely no idea how to explain the situation, is nuanced. He closed the channel. Krathmal, his tactical chief, was watching him from across the bridge with an expression that was trying very hard to be professional and failing. Commander, Krathmal said. Permission to ask a question? No. Are we helping them fix their ship? We are conducting a structural assessment of alien vessel architecture in a controlled environment. Krathmal looked at the feed from the engine room, where Hevrak's son was currently laughing, actually producing the Vrethkai equivalent of laughter, a low, resonant clicking sound that warriors were generally expected to suppress in the field, at something Petrov Ogande had said. Of course, Commander. The repair took 4 hours total. At hour 3, Dara Mensah had somehow ended up in the Vrethkai warship's forward observation deck because Sarevon had made the professionally questionable decision to show her the ship's sensor array when she asked about it, and she had then asked 17 more questions in rapid succession, and he had answered all of them. And now they were standing together looking out at the Kalveth expanse while she described what Earth's night sky looked like from the surface, and he was listening with an expression his species reserved for moments of significant philosophical reorientation. You can see it with your eyes? Sarevon said. The stars, without instrumentation? On a clear night, yeah, thousands of them. She paused. Well, hundreds in most cities now, light pollution and all. But out in the countryside, it's still pretty incredible. You evolved, Sarevon said slowly, looking up at them. Everyone did, I think. Didn't your species? Sarevon considered the Vrethkai homeworld, which had a dense atmospheric layer and perpetual cloud cover, and where the stars had been invisible from the surface for the entirety of their evolutionary history, where space had been a theoretical concept before they achieved spaceflight, not a nightly presence overhead. Where the galaxy had not been something you grew up watching, but something you discovered, suddenly and all at once, like a door opening onto a room you hadn't known existed. No, he said quietly. We did not. Dara Mensah looked at him with an expression that was straightforwardly, uncomplicatedly kind. That must have been wild, she said, going up for the first time and seeing all of it. Sarevon, 30-year intelligence veteran, writer of 12 academic papers on alien psychology, analyst of 43 first contact scenarios, said, It was, and said nothing else for a while. Back in the engine room, the repair was complete. Hevrak's son ran a diagnostic, confirmed the coolant manifold was holding, and delivered the news to Petrov with something approaching reluctance, because the conversation had been, against all military logic, genuinely interesting. Petrov clapped him on what he hoped was a shoulder equivalent and said, Hev, I cannot tell you how much we appreciate this. Seriously. You saved us a very bad day. Hevrak's son processed being called Hev by a soft alien creature he could have folded in half, and decided, privately, that he did not hate it. Your vessel, he said, will require a full structural review within 60 cycles, or it will develop 3 additional failure points. Oh, we know, Petrov said cheerfully. She's a mess, but she's our mess. That is, Hevrak's son said, a deeply illogical attachment. Completely, Petrov agreed. Humans are like that. When Vrexohal boarded the Meridian Clause for the final time, to formally close out whatever this encounter was officially going to be classified as, he found Petrov waiting for him in the cockpit with 2 cups of something hot. Petrov held one out. Vrexohal looked at it with the expression of a commander reassessing every assumption he had ever made about how first contacts were supposed to go. It's coffee, Petrov said. Earth thing. Bitter, kind of weird, extremely addictive. Fair warning. Sohal took the cup, examined it, looked at Petrov Ogande, this small, structurally vulnerable, navigationally incompetent human who had drifted into sovereign Vrethkai space and come out of it with 3 new acquaintances and a repaired coolant manifold. You understand, Sohal said, that you violated 17 distinct Vrethkai territorial protocols. Yeah, Petrov said, that the standard response to such violations is immediate and total elimination. Yeah, that you should, by every metric of rational threat assessment, not be alive right now. Petrov sipped his coffee. I figured. Things went pretty well, though. Sohal looked at him for a long moment. Then he tried the coffee. His facial expression cycled through several stages, none of which were designed for this experience, before settling into something that was not quite enjoyment, but was definitely not rejection. This is, he said, extremely unpleasant. Yep, I want another cup. I'll send you some. We've got a whole case in cargo. Sohal set the cup down and said, with the weight of a commander making an official declaration, Petrov Ogande of the Meridian Clause, your vessel is being designated a Vrethkai adjacent transport under provisional territorial exception. You are authorized to transit the Kalveth expanse on your current route. This authorization is unique, non-transferable, and will be reviewed. He paused. Do not tell anyone. Petrov nodded seriously. Absolutely. Completely between us. If you violate any further protocols, we'll try not to. You will try not to, Sohal repeated, as if testing the weight of the phrase and finding it deeply insufficient. Yes, you will try. He stood, 6 feet of armored apex predator, commander of one of the most feared warships in the Kalveth expanse, heading back to his ship to explain to High Command that he had repaired a human freighter and given its pilot coffee. He paused at the airlock. Your co-pilot, he said. Dara Mensah. She asked Sarav 43 questions about our sensor array. That sounds right, Petrov said. He answered all of them. Also sounds right. He has not answered 43 consecutive questions from anyone in 30 years of service. Petrov smiled. She's got that effect on people. The Vrethkai boarded their warship. The Meridian Clause, coolant manifold holding steady, navigation array only partially functional, but functional enough, drifted out of sovereign Vrethkai space and continued toward the Tisani colony with its cargo of agricultural equipment, running 4 hours behind schedule and carrying a case of coffee that was now, apparently, 20 units short. In the weeks that followed, 3 things happened. The first, Saravone submitted a 40-page intelligence assessment titled Human Anomalous Threat Non-Response and Its Implications for Galactic Contact Protocol, which was classified immediately, read by every senior figure in Vrethkai High Command, and quietly distributed to 11 other galactic powers under sealed diplomatic channels. The summary read, Humans do not respond to dominance displays in any predictable pattern. Recommend immediate reassessment of all standing protocols. The addendum read, This analyst also recommends the galactic community acquire coffee at earliest opportunity. The second, Petrov Ogande delivered his agricultural equipment to Tisani colony, filed a navigation incident report that described his detour through Vrethkai space in terms so blandly bureaucratic that it attracted no attention whatsoever, and was back on a new route within a week. He told nobody what had happened. Dara Mensah told one person, her roommate back on Earth Station 7, who did not believe her. The third. 6 weeks after the Meridian Clause incident, a Vrethkai diplomatic vessel, the first one to enter human-adjacent space in 40 years, arrived at the Earth Freight Authority's way station near the Tisani corridor. It was carrying a formal request for a trade and transit coordination meeting, and a sealed package addressed personally to Petrov Ogande. The package contained a small component, a precision-machined secondary coupling, rated for the exact temperature specifications of the Meridian Clause's engine core, made from a Vrethkai alloy that would not be available on the civilian market for another 30 years. There was no note. There didn't need to be. Petrov installed it himself in the engine room. while Dara leaned against the doorframe drinking coffee and watching. When he was done, he sat back and looked at it for a moment. "So," Dara said, "did we just accidentally make first contact with the Vrethkai?" Petrov wiped his hands on a rag that had been with him since the academy, and probably deserved retirement. "I think we just accidentally made friends with the Vrethkai." "Huh." Dara considered this. "We should probably tell someone." "Probably?" Neither of them moved. Outside, the Meridian Clause held its course through a galaxy that was, very quietly, in the early stages of figuring out that humanity was something new. Not because humans were stronger, or faster, or better armed, not because they had better ships or more advanced technology or fiercer warriors, but because they had a particular baffling, universe-disrupting tendency to drift into impossible situations and come out the other side having somehow made it personal. Every species in the galaxy had a word for an apex predator. None of them had a word for what humanity was. They were working on it,